limited to this meter. So if I tend to come over here, you can shuffle me back. I'll do that, that's great. I don't tend to stay in one position, and I never did when I was lecturing either. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. I've been invited specifically under the remit of contextualising this workshop on inclusive teaching. Contextualising it, especially in the legal context, the policy context, and then to explore what that legal context, the implications of it on curriculum design, pedagogy, assessment, planning and teaching, etc. So that's the framework of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 20 minutes, kind of legal context, a bit of the broader context, and implications. I'm going to be around for the rest of the workshop, and I'll be around just kind of supporting and kind of developing with ideas, so I'm happy if you want to kind of tackle me and say, actually, I completely disagree, or can you tell me more about that? Then I'm happy to do that at a later point in time. Let's actually start. Yeah, nice and simple. So some of this will be old hat to a lot of you, so let's summarize it. Legal context of inclusive teaching really comes back in this day and age to the Equality Act 2010. So the Equality Act 2010, in very quick summary, brought together, streamlined, and brought together a range of anti-discrimination legislation, for example, with regard to race and gender and disability. And under that prohibits discrimination, both direct and indirect, harassment and victimization, according to the 9 protected characteristics, what we commonly refer to as PCs. And those 9 protected characteristics are up on the board for you. So age, disability, gender reassignment, I'm seeing if I can remember without looking at it, marriage and civil partnership, maternity, paternity, pregnancy, race, religion and belief, including non-belief, sex and sexual orientation. So these are all encompassed within the Equality Act. I should note as an aside that can create difficulties when you then get competing protected characteristics coming together in case law, but that's an aside. So discrimination against this is prohibited against these protected characteristics, into which we all fit. But also according to the legislation is that we are allowed to create positive action for these protected characteristics. If they are a disadvantage, we're allowed to put in place a positive action, which is entirely voluntary, and the only requirement is that it is proportionate to the need. The Equality Act 2010, to support it, it dictated in section 149, if anyone is interested, a new public sector equality duty, and this is really what we care about at universities and colleges. And the new public sector equality duty has 3 categories that must be shown to be cohered with. That is that eliminating discrimination, harassment, victimization, and any act prohibited by the Act. But also the second and the third. So the second is the actively promoting equality of opportunity, team characteristics. So that means eliminating disadvantage. That means encouraging participation where there is underrepresentation. What we also have here is the fostering of good relations, something that public sector equality duty we must do. And fostering good relations isn't just about tackling prejudice, it is about promoting understanding and awareness, according to the legislation. And sometimes that's where the Why is my curriculum white comes in. Just to note, these second two, so the equality of opportunity and the fostering good relations, they disclude marriage and civil partnership. I had to make sure I had that the right way around because I sometimes confuse it with maternity and paternity. But the first one keeps in. In order to support public sector bodies in meeting this public sector equality duty, there were further nation-specific equality duties brought in. England in 2011 and Wales in 2011 and Scotland in 2012. And the Scottish public sector equality duties are, we use the term more robust. Other people would use other terms than the other nations, especially other than England. Wales is a bit closer to what we need to do. So there are 8 duties that we must cohere to in Scotland. In England, there are only 3. The 3, and some of these actually trump the Equality Act. So in the Equality Act, you don't have to publish gender gap information. In Scotland, we do because it's part of the public sector equality duty. So it overrides it. The 3 that we care about, and I'm saying we as a physician, as a lecturer and an academic, are the first 3. The mainstreaming, the outcomes, and the equality impact assessments. So mainstreaming equality. We must report on how we are mainstreaming equality in all of the functions of our institutions. Started in 2013, we did an update in 2015, next one will be 2017. And of course, learning, teaching, and assessment is a fundamental part of our functions. So we need to show how we work to eliminate discrimination, advance equality opportunity, and foster good relations in our learning, teaching, and assessment activities. The equality outcomes are also to support this mainstreaming. These were set in 2013. Every institution had their own set of equality outcomes, which are checked, audited by the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Council? I want to say Commission, I always get that one wrong. I'm going to say Commission. Sorry. And it's up to the institutions to set their equality outcomes, and these can be orientated around learning and teaching. So Abertay, for example, one of their equality outcomes, bear with me, is to ensure that all teaching and learning is inclusive and that materials do not stereotype. And one of the training equality outcomes connected to that is that there is training for staff on how to embed equality in learning and teaching. This is also connected in some ways to your Athena Swan and race equality charter mark action plans in Abertay, both of which state that there will be gender and race embedded in the curriculum in order to achieve Athena Swan and achieve the race equality charter mark. So this is where it comes into Abertay, but it's up to kind of the institution to decide.
Can you just say, so
yes.
Is your point that a person who is applying using the Athena Swan legislation as part of demonstrating that they meet those, they would have had to...
They don't have to as part of the Athena Swan. It was Abertay who decided we will embed gender as part in the curriculum.
Do they mean that in a positive or a negative way? So I'm still struggling as to if you had a man who was embedding teaching and learning and so on, which one might expect across the whole, but then is it that those people who would be, I'm not used to these words, that your promotion as a woman to higher senior positions requires you to demonstrate it, whereas a man would...
I don't think, no.
So I'm struggling to understand what Abertay actually means by connecting Athena Swan to this.
Okay, let's put aside Athena Swan for now then.
Just what Abertay means.
Yes. Yeah. I can't answer what Abertay means, I have to confess. But if we put aside Athena Swan and just say with the legislation and the equality outcomes, that there is an intention to be inclusive and embed equality in the curriculum. Now, we see that as a much broader range, as I've kind of come on to in the last 10, than just you must talk about gender if you're teaching science. It's a lot more nuanced and subtle than that, I would argue. That's not to say you can't do it, and Napier do it. They do gender equality courses, lectures in this for their science students.
So it's something we should find out about. What is Abertay saying about this?
Yes, absolutely. The equality outcomes, embedding equality and inclusive teaching, assessing the impacts. This is equality impact assessments, and this is a useful tool, basically. Now, equality impact assessments are a legal requirement for policies and practices, but they are useful, for example, to do an equality impact assessment, which is just to see how you're doing affects equality and diversity and protected characteristics at the development of programs, validation, revalidation, audit, review. That's part of an institutional process, so legally required to have that in mind. Glasgow School of Art do it as the process. They don't do it afterwards. They don't say, right, we've got a policy, now let's do an inequality impact assessment of it. They do it as the development of the policy or the development of the practice. They're always thinking of the implications for protected characteristics. Now, for me, at this point, it all seems like just so much words. I'm not a legalistic person, I am a practicist by trade, if you're interested. And I always like to come back to the broader context. And what does this mean on the ground? What are the facts and figures and the qualitative research telling us? And if we go to the Equality Challenge Unit statistical figures, we can see that there is a reason why we are asked to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations, just if we look at the numbers. If we think that equality of opportunity includes encouraging participation, and then look at the figures, I'm looking at race, gender, and disability, just because those are the three I've been asked to look at. We don't have as many figures, actually, on some of the others. But we know that there are stark differences in relation to participation when it comes to gender with subjects. You can see that on the headline of ECU's latest statistical report, 79.7% of students studying subjects allied to medicine are women, but only 14.4%. This is across the UK for technology and engineering are women. Now, this is especially important when we think about Scotland, and just as an aside, that we are having the Gender Action Plan introduced into our outcome agreements, and this is exactly what the Gender Action Plan is asking us to tackle. Let's move away from gender. If we have a look at just on the Scotland statistic, 8% of first-year undergraduate students in Scotland declared that they had a disability. Now, the figure nationwide varies depending on which body you go to, which statistic you go to, but on average, you're looking at, across the UK, working age individuals, about 16% of them, 1/6, declare a disability. There is a disparity there between the 8% in Scotland and the 16% out with education. Again, if we look at black and minority ethnic, and especially if we look at subjects, we know that there are disparities. So you'll find a much broader range of black and minority ethnic students studying medicine and dentistry and business and administration. You're looking at about 30% there. But when we go to veterinary studies, that goes down to 4%. So it's always important to look at this within your subject. Moving on, participation, let's look at success. Now, I dislike the term success. I don't think success is I've come out with 2-1, therefore I've been successful. It's a much broader thing, but let's look at success in relation to attainment. So we know that apart from business and administrative studies and combined studies, you are more likely to get a good degree, so you want them first, if you are non-disabled than if you are disabled. More likely also to get a good degree if you are disabled with disabled students allowance than without disabled students allowance. You are more likely to get a good degree if you are white than if you are from a black and minority ethnic background. And when you break that down to white and black, so black African, black Caribbean, there is a 19.1% difference between white students achieving a good degree and black students achieving a good degree. Plus side there is that's in Scotland. In England, that goes up to 28% or 26%, one of the two. But still not a great percentage difference. If we look at employment, we can see that with regard to disability, you are more likely to be unemployed. What we mean by that is both not in employment and also not in further study. 6 months after graduation, if you are disabled than if you are not disabled. More likely to be unemployed if you are from a black and minority ethnic background than if you're from a white background. And again, let's disaggregate that and put that into white and black African, black Caribbean. You are twice as likely to be unemployed if you are racialized as black than if you are racialized as white. Yes?
I'm feeling uncomfortable about that final bullet.
Yeah.
Partly because this is pedantic, they're both in the same sentence. If you have a disability like mental health problems or whatever, then that is going to have an impact on you. But that is so different.
Yes.
To just colour. So often when people are talking about discrimination, they kind of, it's almost like they think that, well, black is kind of disability, but it's not. It doesn't imply anything, whereas disability does.
I was going to say, we're not looking at this as a deficit thing.
Yeah.
And we should consider this separately. And when you're looking at your data, you have to consider this both separately and also intersectionally. So actually, and this was kind of, if you look at the intersectional data, of which there's less on, you're more likely to declare a disability if you're white than if you are from black and minority ethnic. Though actually that then ranges, and that ranges as well. So you'll have 5% of Chinese students will declare a disability compared to, I think it's about, don't get that number out, 13% for what's classified as mixed. There's also difficulties with if you just lump them in as black and minority ethnic. The statistics are difficult. And I'm so glad you said the statistics are difficult, because I'm a humanities lecturer and I like qualitative evidence to supplement the quantitative evidence. I don't do quantitative evidence so much. And the qualitative evidence is important, understanding the student experience. Here we've got a diagram actually that it's Spicky Gunn's diagram, it's not mine, I have to say that really clearly. But this was published just 2 weeks ago, was that 13? A couple of weeks ago, in a recent report on equality and diversity in learning and teaching in Scottish universities that Vicky led on. And this comes out of the research as a diagrammatic example of the experience of those that either identify as or who are identified as. And that's important, those two distinguishing points, different, whatever that means. So we still today receive reports of those facing external threats because of a so-called difference. I don't like the term difference, and it's how to use that in certain ways. Of self-censorship, we do, and Vicky purposely uses the term passing here because of the social connotations and the emotive connotations that has to get across the impact of passing. That invisibility really does come from that why is my curriculum white? Again, as a classicist, why do I start teaching epic with Homer? Why don't I start with Gilgamesh? You know, it's a simple thing, but you've then got to go to the history of classics about that lack of role models. That's where your Athena Swan, your Ren, come in, Grace Quality Mark. And unfortunately, even today, and some of the student voices you hear, you can't quite believe it, even today there are fears for physical safety. And perceived fears. The Stonewall latest research showed that the impact of a perceived fear of being discriminated against because of your sexuality at college and university, the impact that has on an individual, whether or not that is realised, that perception still impacts on our experiences at university. Now, this is looking at the wider culture. What can we do with learning, teaching, and assessment that doesn't break down the integrity of our jobs as lecturers and the subject matters in hand? That's exactly what we were tasked with at the Higher Education Academy. Before my time, actually, I came in 2 years ago. Again, this is where Scotland's great. Scottish Funding Council specifically funded Higher Education Academy Scotland to look at the impact and implications of the legislation and how we can support lecturers, or however you identify in your teaching role, to respond to the legislation. And I've put two handouts on your desk. The first is a framework that was created before my time. This was created in 2010, and this looks at things holistically. That's just for you to take away. But what we also created just recently, this came out in May, is the model for learning and teaching practitioners. When you look through this model, I do want to do a big disclaimer and say that actually when we talk about equality and diversity in learning and teaching, often we're not talking about stuff you're not already doing. Sometimes it's about branding it differently and supporting those who are meeting the legislation through the reporting to show that actually you're meeting this. Other times it's slightly different, but it's good to know that that's there. We're also not requiring, by the way, with what I'm about to say, that you become equality and diversity experts. You have individuals in the institution who are equality and diversity experts and are hired for exactly that remit, and then there to go to for advice. So this model basically looks at the legislation and says, well, how can we eliminate discrimination, advance quality of opportunity, and foster good relations? We do that through bringing the theories of inclusivity and diversity inclusivity together in order to support the development of equality and diversity competence of our campuses, of our staff, of our students, of our courses. And it comes under 5 principles. I realise I'm running a bit late, so I'll run through these quite quickly because everything's in the model. So, bear with me, let me get myself together. By the creating of inclusivity, what we mean is the creating of learning and teaching environments which provide all students, regardless of their background, of a supportive environment in which to learn and to reach their potential, whatever that might be. We utilise the origins of inclusivity, which is within disability, but extend it beyond disability. responsibility to look at all of the equality and diversity characteristics. And our principles behind this are basically, quite simply, that learning and teaching practices, processes, and environments can, not necessarily do, but they can, in and of themselves, be exclusive. I'm an academic, I like theory. I refer to Atkinson's theory of the pedagogized other here. It's the idea that the way we teach and the way we learn is something that's come to us because that's how we traditionally do it. We lecture because that's how we've done it, or we do labs because that's how we've done it. We assess by essays because that's how we did it, and surely that's the best way to do it. But what we're doing is we're creating pedagogized norms. We're enshrining the way we teach, the way we assess, the way we learn, what we learn, the environment in which we learn, as a, well, this is how it has to be done. Now, I'm not saying that actually there's no merit to an essay. Of course there's a merit to an essay. Of course there's a merit to a lecture. But it's about turning that in and interrogating that. Asking, well, why? Why is it that in third or fourth year, depending on what course you're doing, we do a long project that in humanities is a dissertation and it has to be written? Why can't that come in a different form? What are the learning outcomes we're looking at here? So what we're asking here with this enabling potential is just to think of, well, what are those barriers? What could they be? And yes, you can look at it equality and diversity, but actually that means for all your students. Because when we're creating pedagogized norms, if you normatize something, you marginalize something else. So the question is, who will we marginalize and who are others? And they're not going to be continuously marginalized. The norm will be marginalized at other times. And it's just having a mind to it. So it's about thinking about what are we doing? Are we varying the way we teach? Are we varying the way we assess? Are we giving assessment choice? So not just varying our assessments, but letting students choose the method of their assessment. This is coming up, by the way, with NUS Scotland. They're really keen on this, so it's good to be aware that this might be next on their agenda. Before it used to be reading lists. Before that, it was anonymised marking. Now, it's choice in assessment. I'm a little bit guilty of that, I'm afraid. Are we creating environments that don't stereotype, that are inclusive, that allow our students to belong? One of the things that we talk about as an underlying principle is to nurture belonging and engagement. Because students tell us they are more engaged, they are more willing to succeed if they feel that they have a connection to the course. We argue that one of the key ways to do that is to bring your students in as partners. Unfortunately, there's not been a lot of literature out there yet about the inclusive nature of students as partners, but I think there is potential there for research if anyone's interested in taking that forward. The idea then of students being able to input on their learning journeys. So how far do we allow students to bring their knowledge, their background, their skills to the curriculum? How far do we let them co-create the curriculum? Now, I know there are varying levels at which you can co-create a curriculum, depending on the kind of, legislation is the wrong word, but the requirements of certain public bodies. But you can co-create a curriculum. Humanities, you can do that quite extensively. In that co-creation, how far are we ensuring that we're enabling all students to input on that and to support each other? So that peer-led learning. So what we're doing there is, rather than saying, right, well, my Asian students are feeling a little excluded, so what can I do to support them? And what you're doing is, well, actually, how can I support all my students in which they are included? And getting their understanding and their qualitative knowledge, all the students, disaggregate the research as you would do normally, according to gender and disability and race and sexuality, to find those findings, but do it with all your students and then disaggregate. The next part is related to why is my curriculum white, so you might not like this part. But the next thing we argue is that in order to foster good relations in particular, we're promoting awareness and understanding. That's the underlying part of the legislation. And we can do that through using the theories of diversity, inclusivity. These are American theories. If you're interested, Nelson Laird and Engbird, who's referenced in the model, utilizes the term diversity, inclusivity, and has a model of it. I am going to have to really rush now, sorry. But basically, what Nelson Laird did was he compared courses that incorporate issues of equality and diversity, much like psychology would do, versus add-on equality and diversity training, add-on equality and diversity courses, and showed through various metrics, etc., that the courses that embedded created more, or had more of an impact on the equality and diversity skills of their students, so fostered greater relations. Part of that can be in incorporating issues of race or gender, if you can, or sexuality in your courses, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It's looking at materials as well. I had a geologer once ask me, well, I'm a geologist, I work with rocks, how can I embed equality and diversity? And we went through his slides, and every single geologist was male and white. Well, let's do this subtly. Let's see what we can do there. Using counter-stereotypical language, never underestimate the power of a pronoun. She is an engineer, he is a nurse. Trips people up because it goes against their normative thinking. The actual utilising students as partners here is also key, because if you're bringing students in as partners, you're bringing their background, their diversity into the creation of your learning and teaching. So you're actually extending that exposure and awareness, I don't like exposure, awareness and understanding who the students bringing their knowledge through. And obviously a key way of doing this is interactivity. Use connect theory all the time, that we become more tolerant if we are familiar with difference, if that difference is in with someone with whom we're familiar. So utilising that power of interactivity, that power of relating to each other. I have many, many examples that if it wasn't a keynote I would give you, but proven to work to encourage equality and diversity competence. But to do all of this, my final point, coming back, we need space for self-reflection. We need space for interrogation, both for ourselves and our students. We need to understand that we come to the fore, every single one of us, myself included, with our own biases, our own privileges, our own backgrounds, and they influence what we teach. I usually throw in examples here of where I've messed up. Thankfully, I don't have time to do that today, so that's great. But it is worth thinking, what is my privilege? And how does that impact? Plenty of literature out there on the hidden curriculum, especially in medicine and nursing, and how that influences through that bias, that personal privilege. And being open and honest with students about that. I would see it simply like you do, why are we teaching a course on myth and 90% of this course is on heroes? I'm more interested in heroes than heroines. Sorry, let's see how we can bring some heroines in for you. Example from mine. But also incorporating that self-reflection for the students. How many of us have developing equality and diversity as a learning outcome? It's definitely a graduate attribute or embedded in that global citizenship. Again, social work, psychology, these are part and parcel we can learn from those. Yes.
Actually, I have mentioned sort of social health science and so on, but one of the things I think you might be able to help me with is that although it's embedded in sociology and psychology, I have never in my entire career had a black colleague. And my first year class has a single black man in it. And I feel it's difficult for him in 1516 only black person.
Yeah.
So here's an example of a subject discipline where that's kind of something we take ownership of, and yet why have I never had a black colleague? And even if I take the other disciplines at Abertay, I used to work in the Midlands, where the colour of the face of my students, it was so diverse. And
but even in the Midlands, so I with permission, I have tons of student stories that I usually bring out, and one of the student stories is actually a friend of mine who Birmingham born and bred and is retraining to be a teacher at Worcester. It's not far from the Midlands, not far at all. And she's the only non-white individual in a cohort of about 150 students, and she knows, she kind of said to me, some of what they're teaching wouldn't work in my neighbourhood. It wouldn't work, not just because my neighbourhood is Asian, but actually because my neighbourhood is a lower socioeconomic class. They're teaching English with an assumption that students will come to school knowing English. And that's not an explicit prejudice, it's just that implicit understanding of what that is. And I said, well, why don't you speak up? Being quite crass in that way. And she said, I don't feel comfortable doing so, I just want to fit in. And that is why one of the first criteria, and I haven't mentioned it in our model, is creating a safe and collaborative environment. Now, people then accuse, you can work for days on that, you can work for years on that. People then accuse me of saying I'm creating padded rooms, where people can be soft and learning is nice and learning is easy. Learning isn't nice and learning isn't easy. Learning is uncomfortable. It's about creating an environment where it's comfortable to be uncomfortable. We then, coming through in a whistle stop, I urge you to take away model, think about your own activities regarding this and what you can do to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations. But we would argue that it's each of our responsibility, and if just each one of us does one small thing, then we can create environments where all students can succeed, and all students can feel like they belong, and all students can come out ready to work in a globalized and interconnected world. Sorry for going over, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline. I'd now like to hand over to Moriamo to give us a short overview about the work that we're doing in Abertay, and then I think we'll break for lunch, so we can take questions that way.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
I'm going to give you just my thoughts on what we're doing here at Abertay. Pauline's already mentioned to you that we're using this action plan to apply for the Athena's ones, and we've also used it for the our application for the race charter mark. These are sample of the action plans that actually makes today's forum. So I've kind of grouped them into the different strands that we need to be mindful of today. The curriculum element, that's one where we all need to review our curriculum from the point of view of when we're designing it, and also from the point of view of when we're planning our assessment, learning outcome, and various other things. From a teaching and learning point of view, you've all seen the video, how white is your curriculum. You've heard what Pauline's got to say. All of the principles that Collins mentioned underpin these three areas that we need to be mindful of. And finally, assessment. That's important for us to be mindful of that as well. And yes, we may not be happy with the facts and the figures that we've got, but Abertay also have attainment gap between BME students and white students. Our statistics is 15% for BME and 26% for white in terms of our students taking first class degree. Okay, so let's be honest, we do have an issue that we need to really be mindful of. Okay. The next slide that I've got here is we also understand that it's a very difficult subject for all of us, and we need to provide support for both staff and students to make sure that we are doing this properly. And we've got 3 core actions to underpin that as well. Okay? Today's exercise is part of that process. Workshop is taking place today, so please, any information you can take away today, that will help you through the process that you need to go through. What I've also done is look at what other institutions are doing in this area. Pauline's giving you the core principles, but what I've done is translated into something that I could relate to, because I'm not an academic, guys, so I'm not here to preach to you. A lot of you are already doing all of these things, but it's all about sharing best practice, knowing what others are doing, and seeing how you also could take this and practice it in your own activities. So example of what other people are doing there. I won't read it out to you, but by all means, do reflect on it. Okay? The key one, obviously, that I would say here is about that embracing the diverse student that you've got. Our students are also part of the assets that we've got within our for our curriculum. Let's use them. Let's get them sharing and understanding where each other is coming from. Assessment is a big one for us. There are lots of things we're doing here. We're doing anonymous marking, but let's look back at when we're looking at our learning outcome and looking at what we're doing from assessment point of view. Some students may find it difficult to take the approach that we are asking them to use. Let's have a diverse range of assessments to try and work with each of the students' own individual learning model, okay? Because what works for one student might not necessarily work for another student. So giving them a range of opportunity may be another way to bridge that issue. Some students find it difficult to understand what it is that you're actually looking for from them. Give them examples. Make it easy for them. Support is not just for staff, but also for students as well. We need to be supporting our students. We've got a range of support services also within the university that we could maybe point students to, okay? So it's looking at what we've got within Abertay that could help us take this forward, okay? That's my thoughts on this. I'm not an expert, but I hope this is helpful.